Hello everyone, this is Peng from Peking University. It's an honor to share our recent work, Auditing Frameworks Need Resource Isolation, a systematic study on the superproducer threat to system auditing and its mitigation. Auditing frameworks is a fundamental component of a provenance analysis system, which collects provenance data, for example, system calls from OS kernels. It can be taken as provenance collector. There are multiple provenance collectors adopted in industry and academy. For example, Sysdig, LTTNG, Linux, and CamFlow. This figure shows the typical architecture of all these frameworks mentioned above. In the kernel space, the events from different processes come into a centralized logging buffer, regardless of their generation speed. In the user space, there are one or several consumers centralized processing the events in the kernel buffer, one by one. We find that they all follow the centralized architecture. However, consider there are three different types of processes in a typical system. The first one is the normal application, for example, NGX. The second one is a malware. It contains malicious operations such as privilege escalation. And the attacker can construct another process. We call it superproducer, which is constructed as a sequence of fast-generated system calls, such as get_uids, that quickly takes up a lot of space of the centralized buffer. For auditing frameworks like Sysdig, LTTNG, and Linux Audit, they limit the resource quota of the collector, and the processing speed cannot catch up with the generation speed of system calls. So the events of malware will be easily dropped due to the full buffer. We call it PDoS attack. For auditing framework like CamFlow, it allocates the collector more resources to avoid dropping provenance data. However, the resource of benign process is crept by the collector, and then it degrades the system's performance. According to the two attacks, we conclude that all the existing auditing frameworks suffer from the superproducer threat. The straightforward solution to mitigate superproducer threat is to suppress the superproducer's generation speed with some specified threshold, for example, C groups. However, this solution is challenging. First, it is hard to determine an effective threshold. Second, the attackers can use a set of superproducers to avoid reaching the threshold. So this solution is impractical. We found that the root cause is the centralized architecture of collectors breaks the logic and resource isolation between processes. To be more specific, audit logs should be the process own data and be processed using its own resource quota. So we need isolation. We then rethink the existing auditing framework and redesign it based on our insight. We have three design goals. The first is zero data loss. We must record all provenance data. The second is performance isolation. We must ensure that the superproducer cannot affect the system performance. The third goal is low overhead. We should not introduce a significantly higher cost than SOTA. To satisfy the three goals, we follow two isolation strategies. The first is self-consuming execution. We make each running thread deguess the provenance data it generates. The second is synchronized logging buffer. We allocate a dedicated logging buffer for each thread and synchronously deguess provenance data within it. Based on the two principles, we proposed a threadlet-based design. We call it NODROP. NODROP instantiates the provenance data processing logic as a threadlet. And the processing logic, we also call it consumer, is inserted into the memory of the current running thread. This thread consumes the provenance data stored in the dedicated logging buffer by itself. What's more, we use several memory protection techniques such as address, randomness, and MPK to prevent the attacker accessing the memory region of the consumer. This figure is the high-level workflow of NODROP. NODROP has 5 stages. For the first stage, the kernel captures a system call and executes it. The kernel module then caches and records the system call in a dedicated in-kernel logging buffer. For the second stage, we check the status of the buffer. If the buffer is not full, we return the control to the host thread. If the buffer is full or the thread exists, control is passed to the consumer. For the third stage, if the consumer is not in the memory of the currently running thread, it instruments the consumer into this thread only for the first time. For the fourth stage, consumer uses the running thread's resource quota to process the transferred provenance data. Last, when processing is complete, control is returned to the original thread. To evaluate NODROP, we answer the following 5 research questions. The first is, can NODROP avoid dropping provenance data? The second is, can NODROP prevent a superproducer from slowing down other applications? The third is, what is the runtime overhead of NODROP? The fourth is, can data reduction techniques address the superproducer threat? The fifth is, can increasing the buffer size address the superproducer threat? For research question 1, we find that NODROP prevents the PDoS attack. It has no events dropping, and the successful attack rate for NODROP is 0. However, the attack rate for Sysdig, LTTNG, and Linux audit are very high. For research question 2, we find that when the workload of the superproducer grows, NODROP maintains the performance of benign applications stable, regardless of the hardware configurations. So NODROP is robust against PDoS attack. Though allocating more resources or actively blocking the whole system prevents event dropping, they introduce significantly performance degrade, as shown in Sysdig CAM flow and Sysdig integrity, as shown in these figures. To answer research question 3, we use Bench to measure the OS overhead and use 8 real-world applications to measure application overhead. We find that NODROP outperforms the SOTA Sysdig because it eliminates the process scheduling and cross-core data transmission. For research question 4, we answer if we can apply some provenance data reduction techniques to kernel to reduce the data amount and further dealing with the superproducer threat. CPR is a typical provenance data reduction algorithm. It is an offline algorithm that depends on the global properties of graphs. We then modify Sysdig's code by inlining the CPR algorithm into the kernel. We find that the kernel CPR can only handle 2,000 events per second per core. However, the superproducer can easily generate 100,000 events per second. So the kernel CPR greatly blocks the running applications and thus amplifying the PDoS attack. We also increase the buffer size of the existing auditing frameworks to the maximum capacity. However, we find that all these auditing frameworks still drop events. What's more, increasing the size of the ring buffer may also significantly slow down the whole system. To draw a conclusion, existing auditing frameworks suffer from the superproducer threat. We find that attackers can either disable existing provenance collectors or paralyze the whole system with a superproducer. We then propose a novel auditing framework, we call it NODROP, that addresses the superproducer threat by providing resource isolation. Our evaluation shows that NODROP introduces lower application overhead than SOTA, for example, Sysdig. Here is the end of my presentation. Thank you for your listening, and feel free to ask me any questions. Thanks again.